for joining us on this Christmas Day. Merry Christmas to those of you celebrating, and blessed holiday wishes to you and your family. We're spending the holiday honoring a man credited with doing so much to make Indianapolis the city it is today. Bill Hudnut died a week ago today after a long illness. He served as Indianapolis mayor longer than anyone before or since. 16 years in that office, and though his final term ended more than 20 years ago, he's still considered one of the key reasons Indianapolis is the city it is today and still will be into the future. Deep down, he knew if he built it, they would come.
One of my successors said, "Bill, I never would have done that in 100 years, build a stadium without a team."
It was a risk that, by the fall of 1984, laid a concrete foundation for former Indianapolis Mayor Bill Hudnut to be known as a visionary here in Indianapolis, a man of the people who always saw much more for the city some called Indianapolis or Naptown. I
was standing there to sort of wave at the trucks and welcome them. A couple of them had bullet holes in them from the experience in Owings Mill the night before, or 2 nights before.
The trucks he's talking about ushered in the Colts and an unprecedented time of growth and development in the history of the city. Hudnut delivered the Hoosier Dome, which delivered the Colts, and about $4 billion dedicated to revamping Indianapolis' downtown area, all within the time span of 16 years.
There's a lot of different events now that are being held as a result of the commitment that we made 20 and 30 years ago to getting into this game.
Which wasn't just about building a better city, but also helping the people who live here. Hudnut did the work, whether it was plowing the snow in blizzard conditions or honoring sports legends like Muhammad Ali with a key to the city. Hudnut was dead set on boosting civic pride within the Circle City. Many today would say he put Indy on the map, but even with all his accomplishments, all the pride he mustered up over the years, perhaps his biggest statement came when this statue was dedicated in his honor 2 years ago. Here, near the northwest corner of Maryland and Capitol, the then 82-year-old shared that he wanted it seated instead of standing to show the connection he had to his constituents.
I'm overwhelmed. I really am. I'm just filled with gratitude. And it's just so marvelous. And I love this city, you know, and I love being mayor for 16 years. And we had a good run, and it was we, not I.
Now, Mayor Hudnut even wrote a goodbye message, which was posted to his CaringBridge account just after his death. He wrote, "I've tried to lead a useful life. Of course, I've made mistakes. I've displayed some real shortcomings and caused some hurts along the way. I'm sorry. But overall, I look back with gratitude. There's no such thing as a self-made man or woman. We're all indebted to others, a point I always tried to make whenever some thoughtful recognition like Hudnut Commons would come my way." You can find that full post right now on our Indianapolis This Week Facebook page. And all this week, we've heard a lot of high praise for Bill Hudnut, including from some of the other people to hold the office of mayor. Greg Ballard told us that Hudnut is a true founding father of modern Indianapolis.
He, with his vision, with what he did with downtown, with sports, with the amateur sports capital of the world, building out as much as he did, really gave Indianapolis a name. It propelled it really into a different category while he was the mayor. You have to be out there, that you have to be with people, listening to them all the time, kind of embracing them. You have to be kind of a bit of a cheerleader for the city, but underneath all that, you have to keep building the city also. So he had that rare combination of being able to be kind of like a father to the city, the cheerleader combination, but underneath, he was building, and it was a great combination for the city.
When asked what he wanted his epitaph to read, he wanted it to read, "I built well and I cared about people." And indeed, that will be so. He was a transformative figure for our city. As the citizens of our city walk through our city streets and see the flags being flown at half-staff, they will stop and look around the city that he transformed in his 4 terms, an unprecedented tenure as the mayor of our city. Bill Hudnut was one of the first people I talked to after the votes were counted, and he was very liberal in his dispensing of advice about how the city should continue to grow and evolve. So what really began as a political contest ended up to be an enduring friendship of many years.
What was his advice?
Well, he said, continue to build and care about people.
And this from former Republican Mayor Stephen Goldsmith. Bill Hudnut was a remarkable person and an extraordinary mayor. Indianapolis residents now and in the future benefit from his vision and energy that truly transformed our city. Perhaps the most valuable part of his legacy, his lifelong commitment to inclusivity and tolerance, which he continued to champion long after his elected life ended. And welcome back to Indianapolis This Week as we continue to celebrate the legacy of former Mayor William Hudnut, including those who knew him so well. Here's Rafael Sanchez.
Jason, thank you so much. Joining us now is Dave Arland, a family friend of former Mayor Bill Hudnut. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you here. So let's talk about the mayor. Someone called him the architect of the modern-day Indianapolis. You worked with him. You were his former press secretary in the last few years. Is that true? Is he the architect?
You know, no man does all of this on his own. I think Bill was a tremendous leader. He was very good at bringing people together, even people who disagreed about certain subjects. He would bring them into a room and he'd quote the Bible. He'd say, "Come, let us reason together." Because politics, he used to say, is the art of the possible, of doing what you can do. And Indianapolis, you know, it's hard to remember what we were like if you flash back to 1975. There was no dome stadium. There was no focus on amateur sports. IUPUI was a very small place. People didn't live downtown. You couldn't buy groceries downtown. You wouldn't really come downtown to go out, to have a good time. So a lot of what we enjoy today, Circle Center, Lucas Oil Stadium, which grew out of the RCA Dome or Hoosier Dome, the Colts, saving the Pacers, all of these things really have their genesis in the Hudnut years.
So what made him take away from the cameras, right? We hear about this man who was a visionary, and he was a visionary. What made him so focused on seeing Indianapolis become bigger than he could have ever imagined?
He was a very spiritual guy, obviously. He led the Second Presbyterian Church up on the north side. That's how he came to Indianapolis. But I think he saw an opportunity to really make a difference. He served for a year in Congress and I think was a little frustrated that he couldn't get more done. He was only there for 2 years, was swept back to Indianapolis during the Watergate aftermath. And then he worked for what is now the University of Indianapolis for a little while and then decided to throw his hat into the ring to become mayor. And it's, you know, again, it's hard to believe that time in our city. He inherited the beginnings of the renaissance of Indianapolis that we know today from Dick Lugar and John Barton before Lugar, and the formation of Unigov, bringing all of that city and county government under one umbrella. But Bill really excelled in propelling things forward and putting to work the best people to get the job done.
As someone who had to speak for him, what did you learn from him? Because you had to be his official gatekeeper, as the press secretary. So what did you take away from that leadership and his way of acting and doing?
You know, one little story, we had some environmentalists who were just pounding us over trash issues or something like that. And he brought this group into the mayor's conference room and he said, look, you can attract a lot more bees with honey than vinegar. Well, vinegar is their part and parcel. That's how they do their work. And so he was trying, even somebody so fundamentally opposed to something he cared about, he was trying to bring them along. And I just think he was very good at bringing different kinds of people together and cementing the relationships. He was also a national leader, very well regarded at the National League of Cities, which he led at one point. Same for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So he was looked at all over the country as not only a very tall guy, but and a Republican, but also the mayor of Indianapolis and Indianapolis on the move.
And I heard he was so impressed when he came back to visit the city for the Super Bowl, that was something that he just marveled at because it was his city and that he had a part in the way the city had grown.
Yeah, if you think back to the Super Bowl, remember those zip lines that went right down.
He went on the zip line as well.
He went on the zip line. He said it took 4 or 5 or 6 tries to get him to go. I didn't go on the zip line, but he went on the zip line. And I think it was a very gratifying thing to come back, and, you know, because we had talked for so many years.
Yeah.
We had tried to get a Super Bowl and didn't get it. And with the Super Bowl, you got to keep trying and keep at it. And That's probably a good way to remember Mayor Bill, is that he kept trying.
A lot of folks will always remember him as dressing up as the tallest leprechaun, possibly in national history during the St. Patrick's Day parade. Now, as the press secretary, did you ever discourage him and say, Mr. Mayor, that's probably not the best look for a mayor? Or did you say, that's just Bill?
Well, he did set the tone for those things. So we knew when it was time for St. Patrick's Day, he would want to be a leprechaun. But there were a lot of things that he did that were out of the limelight, that people don't really know that much about. But as we've seen stories about him and commentary on social media, people remember him reading books to them in the library, because he did that. You know, we always had to schedule time that he could go visit with senior citizens. That was very important to him. He would run through the sprinklers with the inner city kids. You know, he loved being mayor. It was great.
Dave Arlen, thank you so much for sharing the memories of Mayor Bill Hudnut. We thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jason, now back to you.
We welcome in our political insiders now. Mary Beth Schneider, of course, Laura Beck, Abdul Hakim Shabazz. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, you name it. We've got it covered here this morning. Let's talk about Bill Hudnut and the legacy he has left behind, the stories. There are a lot of stories as well. Mary Beth, let's start with you. Your memories of Bill Hudnut, what will you remember the most?
You know, probably the number one thing I remember is Bill Hudnut at the St. Patrick's Day parades. He wore a leprechaun suit and danced in front of the parade all the way. You hear all the time that Bill Hudnut was a cheerleader for Indianapolis, but I don't think that quite captures it, because that would put him on the sidelines. Bill Hudnut was always at the front of the parade. He was the drum major. He was a huge booster for the city. He had a great vision. When I came to Indianapolis in 1979, downtown was dead. It was really pathetic. There was still a couple old department stores, but there was hardly any customers. And he brought, you know, when bringing the NFL here, people think team, but really what that brought in was customers, restaurants, shops. It really revitalized downtown, and just unimaginable if you weren't here back before Bill Hudnut.
Abdul, your thoughts?
It was interesting. We came here, our first tour of duty, when my dad worked out at Fort Bend in 1990. So Bill Hudnut was already starting to get ready to sort of wind down his mayoral career. But Bill Hudnut for Indianapolis, it was like being from Chicago, like a daily. You just couldn't imagine one without the other. And if you look at the progress Indianapolis made, like Mary Beth said, whether it was under Steve Goldsmith, Mark Peterson, you know, Greg Ballard, even under Joe Hogsett, you know, Bill Hudnut sort of laid a lot of that foundation. And it's classic of Indianapolis has always had sort of the right mayor, excuse me, at the right time for whatever it was that the city needed. And it was Hudnut, you know, sort of took the mantle from Dick Lugar and, you know, and Unigov, and got us the government consolidation that made it possible to do the development and sort of revitalize and bring the city, you know, back from the near dead.
Are you filibustering this morning?
Oh, far from it.
Jeez. Merry Christmas to you, too.
Saying nice things. I'm saying nice things about people today.
You know, he was so successful as mayor. A lot of people don't realize they changed state law to allow Bill Hudnut to run for mayor again, and it was called the Hudnut Forever Law. It's still on the books. The Indianapolis mayor can run.
He said so often in what we heard earlier in the program, he emphasized we, not necessarily him. There's a lot of bipartisanship work that went on behind the scenes there. Laura, talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think one of the things about him is that he really moved Indianapolis into the modern age. And even though he had left Indianapolis, he continued to work with other mayors, including Mayor Peterson, and I'm sure he was very helpful to Mayor Ballard along the way as well. The other thing I think that he did, too, is that he had to work with a Democratic governor at the time, because Evan Bayh would have been governor when he was mayor. And so that's a unique relationship that mayors have with mayors and governors have, especially when they're of different parties, and they often find a way to really put aside those differences that they might have politically and work together. So he certainly left his mark on the city in many ways.
Which transitions perfectly to my next question, because he did leave this mark on the city of Indianapolis, but that mark on the city left its mark on the region, left its mark on the entire state. Talk a little bit about that, the impact he had on the entire state.
One of the things that Bill Hudnut said that was brilliant was you can't be, you know, a suburb of nothing.
Right.
And you need a strong, healthy, vibrant, Indianapolis, otherwise Carmel and Hancock County and Avon and the surrounding areas don't exist, because you can't have that hole in a donut of absolutely nothing. And his work really built up the center of Indianapolis.
I was a very bit player in the Peterson administration, but one of the things that I did take away from it, especially because I worked at the Department of Metropolitan Development in the early 2000s, is that you've got to have a strong regional center and a strong core in your downtown, and we see that in cities and in states all over the country where you don't have that. You really lose that. So the fact that he was able to not just bring the NFL here, but think of all the corporate headquarters we have. I mean, Lilly could have always packed up and gone someplace else. You could also have, we had the NCAA ultimately ended up coming here, the Pan Am Games, IUPUI. So when you really think about what that groundwork did, it's incredibly impressive, because you have to have that thriving heartbeat in the center, or as you said, you'll be a suburb of nothing.
There was a political downside, though, to all this success for Bill Hudnut. He was a larger-than-life figure, and a lot of the other areas of the state were sort of jealous of the success of Indianapolis. That Indianapolis, they thought, was getting everything. And so he ran for Secretary of State, and ironically, the man who ended his political career,
Joe Hogsett,
who's now the mayor of Indianapolis, and had very good things to say about Hudnut now.
Well, the other thing, too, when you think about that as well, is that they're on both sides of the aisle. I think there's very much an anti-Indianapolis sentiment out there, because everyone in Indianapolis seems to think that their perception is that the world revolves around them. And so making that transition, it's always been really hard for an Indianapolis mayor to run for governor. Steve Goldsmith tried to do it and was not successful.
No Indianapolis mayor has ever become governor.
So I think when Mitch Daniels decided to come back and run for governor, that was one of the reasons why he embarked on his RV tour for 18 or 15 months in advance.
Quickly, for younger lawmakers here in Indiana, what can they learn from Bill Hudnut?
To reach across the aisle and not to fight ideological wars, fight the wars you can win, fight pragmatic, fight the things that help everybody, and almost a Reagan-esque, a rising tide raises all boats.
It's called being a public servant, is what Bill Hudnut exemplified. And not to make a partisan statement here, but Bill Hudnut is not the kind of guy who tried to give himself a 119% raise. He'd be working to try to figure out how to put more money in pockets and improve the quality of life of all of Indianapolis citizens.
Stick right here, our insiders, of course. Indiana also marking the death of a longtime state lawmaker, of course, State Senator Larry Borst. He passed away Monday at the age of 89. He had served in the General Assembly for 38 years, representing Marion and Johnson counties until 2004. The Republican from Greenwood was best known in Indiana for his leadership as chair of the Senate Finance Committee. Our own insider, Kip 2, considered Borst a friend.
Senator Larry Borst was one of those rare politicians who was incredibly tough in public. Anybody who had to go before him in his committee would get nervous, for sure, to have to face him, because he was incredibly smart. He asked incredibly tough questions. He didn't allow for much baloney in his committee. And he knew what he wanted to get accomplished, and so you had to be ready and prepared. Off camera, when he wasn't in front of committee, he was as good a person and nice a person as you would ever want to meet. You never wanted to get on his bad side, because you'd stay there a long time. But he was a great person. He was a Hoosier through and through. He cared very deeply about the state of Indiana. Even though I was of the opposite party, we got along famously. We really miss Senator Borst.
Some thoughts there on the late State Senator Larry Borst. Your memories of Larry Borst and all of the time spent serving the state of Indiana.
I covered the legislature when Larry Borst was one of about 3 giants who were there, who pretty much were involved in everything, had to come through him, and boy, I learned so much about the budget, about governing. He was fascinating. He could be impatient with fools, and yet was always willing to answer my questions, and was incredibly patient with, I'm sure, some dumb questions from me. I just, when he got beat, I really couldn't believe it, because it was, to not have Larry Borst in the State House just didn't seem right.
To be there for almost 4 decades, though, it meant he was doing something right for a very long time.
Well, but I mean, they also, but those sort of those giants of the State House back in those days, they also were, they were fighting against that Tea Party revolution, and that, the Republicans have now started, they've tacked so far to the right, particularly in their primaries, that you lost that institutional knowledge of somebody like a Larry Borst or a Bob Garton. And so, and you also lost some of the just the gentleman manners that you would see with some of these elected officials. And you don't, that level of camaraderie just doesn't exist anymore, because when you're crusading on an ideological front, you're not necessarily focusing on, with the bottom line for the state budget.
Laura has filibustered all of our time here, Abdul.
Sure, I'm gonna
a
get
holiday
Merry
gift for
Christmas
you
morning.
and everyone else.
Usually it's Merry
Abdul,
Christmas.
Laura, Mary
I got coal outside the
Thank you
car.
for